Welcome to the Infinita Lab Podcast. Today, we are tackling a big and controversial topic, hydrogen energy. There is a lot of hype, there is a lot of skepticism, there is a lot many unanswered questions. So, we'll hopefully go through them. Our guest today is Salim. He is President and CEO of PowerTap Hydrogen Fueling, and his company is reshaping the hydrogen industry by tackling the biggest problem in hydrogen adoption infrastructure. So Salim, welcome.
Thanks, Pradyum. Yeah, excited to be here, and I'm excited to discuss why hydrogen is more than just a buzzword, and really anticipating to be a really exciting part of the market today, and then going into the future.
So Salim, I think the first question would be probably, we are gonna call the elephant in the room. Hydrogen has been around for some time. People have called it the fuel of the future for past, I don't know, 50 years. But it is always like it has never arrived. Why is that?
So, I think what really drives it today, I'll just look at it from today's perspective, is decarbonization is sort of an effort being pursued around the world. Yes, there's a change in administration here in the United States, but the momentum is already going. So from that perspective, the strategy that the US government had previously established to decarbonize, it included a significant deployment of fuel cell electric trucks
Mm,
and cars and battery electric vehicles. And the demand for hydrogen stalled. So the question is, why is that? And the real question, the real answer is there are just not enough fuel stations. And why is that? And I think part of the problem is that in the industry today, if you go to a hydrogen fuel station, there's a certain percent of chance, probably one third of the time, you're not going to find a station that has reliable sources of hydrogen or availability of hydrogen. And that's really the question that's of concern.
mm,
So companies aren't building enough fuel stations because of that. Now, the PowerTap solution solves that problem. Uh, but there's a stall because the market is very difficult. But in any case, groups like Toyota and BMW are entering the market and they're investing in and to some degree getting into support of hydrogen fueling stations and the development of those. And it's that activity which will start to drive it. And we generally believe in the industry today, here in the United States especially, the Trump administration could actually be quite helpful, especially with our type of hydrogen production and distribution.
mm,
And that's the momentum that's going to drive the infrastructure market and then uh, the vehicle market, really starting with heavy duty trucks
mm,
as opposed to driving it with light duty vehicles like Toyota Mirais and Hyundai Nexos.
mm,
And I think it's going to be, the heavy duty trucks that are going to drive it over the next, say, 3 to 5 years. It's going to take that long.
mm. So it is like, you are kind of focusing on heavy duty, but are you kind of, in terms of the model, are you doing something different in what is the model like,
Sure.
is that anything different in there?
Yeah, I mean, the key difference between what we're doing and what everybody else is doing, and there are not that many players in the market, is that we're doing an on-site hydrogen production and dispensing solution, meaning in a small footprint, we're able to deploy a station that fits in a good percentage of existing fuel stations, light duty and heavy duty. Heavy
Mm,
duty truck stations are very different because they're huge. You just don't want to take up a lot of the parking space, but you want to be able to produce hydrogen. And in a very large station, we can do it in under 10,000 square feet in
mm,
terms of hydrogen production and dispensing to meet the needs of the market more in the future. Today, there is very little demand because there are only 200 trucks out there today. But you got to have to plan for decades down the line with real estate today. From that perspective, there are only 100 stations that exist today, fuel
Mm,
stations, hydrogen fuel stations in particular, and that's in contrast with 160,000 petrol station, gas
mm,
stations, however you want to call it. And
mm.
so, it's really those new station deployments that's going to drive the arrival of fuel cell electric hydrogen vehicles. And that also includes, we didn't talk about it in previous discussions we'd had, but hydrogen internal combustion engines as well. It's going to drive that.
So you kind of flipping the model, right? You are, instead of massive hydrogen production kind of thing where you then send it to the stations, you are kind of producing it at hydrogen on site, right? And
Correct.
then these
Absolutely.
like big fleets or whoever is getting the hydrogen right there, it is produced right there and then kind of filled right there. Like it is kind of a fuel station with production capability as well.
Absolutely. And you're hitting on a really important point.
Mm,
There is a cost and logistical aspect of that, which is extremely high in cost. So you've got massive centralized production. Okay, that's a saving of cost, but in the end, it's the long distance transport that's expensive, very expensive, and it probably comprises maybe 50 to 60% of the cost of hydrogen today, maybe more. What I mentioned earlier that there's, 1/3 of the time you will not find a station that has fuel
mm,
for you. And it's because of the uptime issues and the configuration of the stations with compression and all these sorts of things. To the user, it doesn't matter. I got
mm,
to pull up and I need fuel now. I don't have
mm.
time to wait for an hour
Yeah,
until you
yeah,
figure your
of course.
system out.
Mm.
Um, and so it's really important to look at it from that perspective. If you have it on site, you eliminate the cost of this stuff, and then you've got the on-site production system, which enables you to immediately dispense. That's our system.
So I mean, it's still kind of like, one of the criticism of producing hydrogen is that it is really not green. At the end of the day, it is kind of you use the like SMR, right? Which is
That's right.
basically steam methane reforming, right?
That's right. That's
So,
right.
so that is really not green because it produces a lot of CO2. It is
Sure.
still fossil fuel based.
At
So,
its face, that's true.
mm,
The unique approach that we take, and it really fits into the standard in California that's required if you're to meet the low carbon fuel standard carbon credit requirements, is we blend natural gas with renewable natural gas to
mm,
create our hydrogen. And then our system captures the CO2. We have an off-taker of CO2, and right now it's dry ice. In the future, it's going to be the production of sustainable aviation fuels, of which hydrogen and CO2 are critical and important components. But if you have green CO2 along the lines of what we've got, then we can do that. So the end result is cheap, efficient, low carbon hydrogen production right at the point of use.
mm. So, I mean, it is more important to produce hydrogen at the point of use, decentralize the production and actually provide it. Okay, so
That's right. I
that
mean,
part I understand. You're
there's
saying,
a unique aspect of this, right? So our particular SMR, I mentioned it, but I'm going to be a little more explicit about it. We capture the CO2
mm,
to make our low carbon hydrogen. And so you talk about colors of hydrogen, and I know this is fairly commonly understood. There's blue, there's green, there's teal, there's black, white, who knows, right? All these colors. And it's, the way we look at it is from the perspective of carbon intensity. And, from our perspective, when we blend in renewable natural gas that's coming from dairy farms, for example, which has very low, talking about negative carbon intensities under, 300 grams of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen you produce. So negative, meaning that we're sucking it out of the system in essence, right? And why is that? Because it comes from farting cows. Okay. So we're extracting it from that perspective.
mm,
And that gives us a negative carbon intensity with our input, our feedstock, and ultimately leads to a zero carbon intensity hydrogen production. So
mm.
that's what makes us sort of call it clean hydrogen instead of putting a color to it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great approach, that still it is clean and it is on site. So you are trying to make it on site so that it is kind of decentralized, it is available wherever it is used,
That's right.
and it is clean to a full degree, you know. But how, I wonder how it changes the cost equation, where the cost wise it is.
Sure. I mean, the biggest cost aspect, and it's where green hydrogen really it has the highest cost,
Hmm,
and it's in electricity. And so to split so this is the other way hydrogen is made. You take water and you split the hydrogen from the oxygen. That requires a lot of electricity. The
hmm,
steam methane reformation process it doesn't have that high of an electricity use.
hmm,
So we're producing it with less electricity, and we're using natural gas as the energy generator in a sense,
hmm,
right? And so that's really where the cost differentiation lies.
hmm,
It's in the electricity.
hmm. Okay. So, so cost-wise, it actually makes sense. That is what you're saying, right?
That's right. That's
Mm.
right.
So, I mean, another question which will, I think, very naturally comes out of it, like if everything is good, and you have it cheaper, but still there is a huge infrastructure gap, right? Gas station do not have hydrogen pumps right now, right?
You're right, and that's a good
And,
point. And I think what drives it in the beginning,
mm,
it is incentives in order to make it make sense to bring all that capital expenditure out.
mm,
In the long run, once market demand is there and there's vehicles, light duty and heavy duty vehicles on the road, then it makes sense on a standalone basis. It
mm,
doesn't
mm,
need incentives anymore. And I think that's the question that a lot of investors would ask is, well, you can't, you're not going to have incentives for the rest of your life,
mm.
not for the next 50 years or something like that. Certainly
Yeah,
not. But at
yeah.
least there's a 10 to 15 year, depending on which incentive you're using, time frame for the deployment of these kinds of capital expenditures.
Mm.
Um, and that's all it really requires. In fact, it needs less. And so I would say that, depending on how quickly the hydrogen market takes hold, transportation as industries and oil and gas companies and fleets and so on and so forth still try to decarbonize regardless of what's going on in the US government because of global requirements. Not only are they deploying in the United States, but they're deploying in Canada or they're deploying in Europe and so on. Um, then it really does make sense from a financial standpoint that this will stand alone with that kind of a market.
So incentive are one thing, but I was thinking about, what about a scale up? What is your strategy for a scale up on this? Where you're going first? Where are you going next?
Yeah. So the demand, well, let me put it this way: the OEMs will put out vehicles as we put out infrastructure.
Mm,
So we know that the vehicles will be made available. In places like California, the incentives are there for the vehicles
mm,
that the state's offering. In other states, that's starting to happen in the Northeast and Oregon and Washington. And the once the fire catches on, it'll be wildfire, which is
mm.
which is good. And I don't want to use that analogy too much in California. Very challenging time for that from that perspective. But I think that our plan today, let's put it this way, our plan is to cross the United States. We're starting in California. We're going to cross the United States. I think that sort of the next market that will play into that is Canada. So it'll be North America as a whole. And then Asia and the Middle East has a lot of demand for hydrogen, especially because there's feedstock there that is available, which is good. And in certain parts of Europe, there's also our natural gas feedstock. As a as a company, though, our parent company is investing in a number of hydrogen technologies. So it's
Mm,
not going to be steam methane reformation forever necessarily.
mm.
But the fact is that as the market changes, our parent company will be investing in those other technologies. And so when it gets to the point where electrolysis makes sense and there's enough renewable energy, electricity
mm,
specifically to produce hydrogen using water electrolysis,
mm,
then it'll make sense, and we'll shift to that,
mm.
and we'll be able to do it in a small footprint. We feel very confident with the partners that we have.
Okay. Like, but what is the current one? I mean, there are a lot of plans, right? But current one, what is on the ground? Like, what you are doing on the ground. I thought that
Yeah,
you were talking about going. You are currently working with like trucks and heavy vehicles, right?
that's right. That's right. Yes, the plan is to have those heavy duty stations
Mm,
installed first, and we're working with the OEMs, we're working with the major oil and gas companies to get those deployed. It's going to take some time because it takes some time to get entitlements and permits and then actually deploy. So, in the next 24 to 36 months, you'll start to see these stations come on. Heavy duty stations first. And it makes sense, right? Because if you look at the
yeah.
comparison between a heavy duty vehicle that requires 70 plus kilograms of hydrogen and compare that to a Toyota Mirai that requires 8 kilograms of hydrogen, if it takes or one truck to produce the kind of hydrogen that 9 vehicles need, then that's what's going to drive it, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
heavy duty trucks are going to drive it, get the cost of hydrogen down to a point where it makes sense for light duty vehicles, especially people that have range anxiety and
Mm,
want to be able to go to Vegas from Los Angeles in one fell swoop without worrying about stopping at the Tesla charging center or whichever charging center for that matter at the third or halfway point, and sit there for 8 hours. The hydrogen vehicle can get you there in one fell swoop. So that's the sort of approach we're taking.
yeah, I think one thing which I wonder about, I mean, when you are putting up these decentralized stations, right? How
Mhm.
much how much they can produce? Like, how many trucks, for example, they can fill up in one day, if I.
Sure. So you can look at it this way. Just we'll do ease of calculation, 100 kilograms in a truck. It's
Mhm,
70, but you get the idea, right? So if I'm producing 8 tons of hydrogen, do the math, right? It's
mhm,
800 trucks, right?
mhm,
So I can do a lot of vehicles. I think in the beginning, people would say, well, why would you do that when there's only 200 trucks on the road across the
mhm,
country? Right.
mhm,
So what we do is we have this unique strategy, maybe not so unique because people started to figure it out. It's
mhm,
called an evolving spoke to hub strategy, where we start with a very small volume of production
mhm,
in a mobile fueler, for example. It's produced somewhere and delivered to the site
mhm,
for 1 to 10 trucks. And as demand starts to increase, then we increase that to a larger, more static stationary tank
mhm,
that has a capacity of, say, 2 tons.
mhm,
And then we bring an on-site production system, which it'll take a while to build. So while we've got the mobile fueler, and then that graduates to a central storage system with 2 tons, we are building the on-site production system for a site that has the possibility of
mhm,
having a lot of vehicles that it needs to fuel. And so we meet the demand
mhm.
as we're building the station, if you know what I mean.
No, like that story. In my mind, it was that is there enough you can produce, but it is lot more than enough that you
Yeah,
can
it's a lot
produce
more than that.
and a small enough footprint, right? That is another thing. Like, you can build something in an existing let's later on when hydrogen would you will be running like not commercial but actually passenger vehicles, let's say cars and all. Could it be that it is a small enough, a unit is small enough that you can produce hydrogen on site, a small size or
At
a
someone's
standard
house, you mean,
size
you're talking.
gas station, right?
Sure, yeah. A couple things I would just want to mention. So, one thing that you're not talking about, but I'm just going to touch on briefly, is you build a lot of excess hydrogen production. Then what people don't realize is hydrogen is a storage mechanism for
Mm,
energy. And especially if you're producing that hydrogen in the middle of the day when you have solar electricity as your electricity source, then you're able to produce it in larger volumes, and you can use that hydrogen then to produce electricity to charge battery electric trucks and vehicles.
Mm.
So a station would automatically be able to be used to charge battery electric vehicles in addition to hydrogen fueling. So that's
Uh-huh.
important. And then you're talking about potentially even further decentralizing a fuel station to people's homes. And yes, I mean, that's something that's in the works. I mentioned earlier that our parent company is investing in other technologies, and one of them is an advanced electrolyzer, which enables you to have at home a small production unit in what we're calling the hydrogen wall, for example,
Mm.
which enables you to take your natural gas input, produce your hydrogen, and it could be any hydrogen carrier for that matter. And there's a lot of hydrogen built into things in our daily lives. It's
Mm.
amazing how much there is. It is people use this as a sort of a standard thing to say, right? There's hydrogen. There's more hydrogen than any other element in the glow
Mm.
in the universe, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, you can produce the 4 or 5 kilograms of hydrogen you need to fuel your vehicle, charge your battery electric vehicle, and provide you enough hydrogen for your home,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, electricity for your home based on that
Mm.
hydrogen that you're producing. So that's certainly something in the offing. We need to develop that technology, but it's there in the process of being developed.
That's it is kind of like, talking about a lot of back and forth kind of hybrid systems that
Hmm.
you can create electricity, you can put them. So it's nice. I think the way it is going, I think there could be a lot of different kind of system that could be produced.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and it all depends upon what actually situation is, what kind of situation you are, or what kind of unit you are kind of producing, and how the energy usage is there in that particular unit. So
Sure.
pretty
Yeah.
exciting, I think, the way it is working. I want to switch gear a little bit, and I want to kind of another touch upon another controversy, because I think a lot of people think about it. When they think about our hydrogen, they compare it to electric, right? Battery,
Mhm.
electric
Yeah.
batteries. And if you talk to Tesla fans, Elon Musk have said, hydrogen is dead, right?
Mhm.
Batteries are winning. Uh, there is no need for hydrogen at all, right? So what do you have to say about it?
So there are a couple of things, right, that I'll touch on. Maybe if you're thinking about it, there are 4 problems maybe you can look at. The first is that a hydrogen truck or a light duty vehicle for that matter can charge fairly quickly. And in terms of a light duty vehicle, it's 3 to 5 minutes, assuming that there's 100% uptime or pretty close to 100% uptime. And with a truck, it's 20 to 30 minutes. Now, if you think about it, to charge a battery, it's going to take at least 45 minutes to an hour.
Hmm.
In a light duty vehicle, if you want a fast charge, give you 80% charge. Maybe there are batteries that will come out soon, and maybe it'll be not as soon as we think. That may charge in less than that.
Hmm.
But 3 to 5 minutes fueling for a light duty vehicle, 30 minutes for fueling for a heavy duty truck. And with a truck, by the way, you'd charge for 4 to 8 hours to get a proper charge on it, more than likely.
Hmm.
So there's that. But then more importantly, on a truck, take a truck, for example, if you have a big battery, the operative word there is big. It's big, it's heavy. And when you're transporting stuff in
Hmm.
a long haul heavy duty truck and you've got 85,000 pounds gross weight in that
Hmm.
vehicle, and 20,000 pounds of that 85,000 pounds is battery,
Hmm.
and that means you can only transport 60,000, 65,000 pounds of stuff, right? That's a problem. So then you'd ask, well, and this is what I'd say, of course, first thing is a fuel cell and hydrogen is a lot less heavy than the 20,000 pound battery. It's more like, 5,000 pounds or 7,500 pounds.
Hmm.
And so already from a weight perspective, you're better off with a hydrogen vehicle
Hmm.
because you can transport it further. It's a weight issue. You get the
That
point.
is true. Hmm.
And then from a driving distance standpoint, a hydrogen fuel cell electric truck can uh, can go as far as a diesel truck can today.
Hmm.
right? I mean, the costs are high because the infrastructure isn't out there, the number of vehicles isn't out there. But once that equalizes, then from a long haul perspective, hydrogen makes more sense than battery electric for the reasons that I stated. Then there are supply chain constraints, right? Because in order to produce batteries that are as big as they are, that
Mm,
relies on rare minerals like lithium and cobalt and so on. And I think that those supply chain constraints are going to start coming to play, especially as the trade war, assuming that trade war begins with tariffs and so on and so forth between China and the United States. And so it starts to make hydrogen a really good situation.
mm,
And just looking at that in a decarbonized economy, it makes sense not only for heavy duty trucking, but potentially for aviation, for maritime shipping, even for backup power generation, and in other ways, industrially speaking, in the production of steel and chemicals as well.
mm.
But
No, I
that
think
requires a decarbonization as
yeah,
essential.
I think that is true. I think um, common people, like most of the people interact with cars and phones, small things where batteries are actually make sense. Actually, hydrogen
Yeah,
does not make sense.
it doesn't.
Uh, and that's why they don't even think about all these heavy stuff like aviation, heavy trucks, how they're gonna like on the ships, backup operations where there are systems are pretty big, steel production, chemical production, as you mentioned, like industrial production kind of thing,
Yeah,
and those
absolutely.
are wide open,
And
right?
and so this is a really important point that I think we need to make here, and that is that there's not a single pie size. It's going to be
Mm,
battery electric, and that's all. I think you have to look more broadly and realize that we have to look at it as an all of the above strategy.
mm,
And it'll be battery, it'll be hydrogen, supported by nuclear,
mm,
by natural gas,
mm,
by solar, wind, hydro, the full breadth of possibilities. We should be looking at it more broadly as opposed to narrowing down. Here's another thing that's really important. If you
mm,
go battery electric all, and in certain industries you can't produce steel with
mm,
the electric power that comes from battery. It just doesn't
mm,
make sense. Or
mm,
even electricity, period. It needs high heat, and you get high heat from hydrogen.
mm.
So it's an all of the above strategy. We have to open our minds to that.
That's a great point, by the way. That I think it is. People, I mean, we are all thinking in black and white, either
Mhm.
or kind of.
That's
And
right.
you said that it is not a black and white, it is a full spectrum of
That
things.
you'll see,
Application
yeah, you'll
are
see a
many.
hashtag on LinkedIn and not or, right? And I think that's how we have to look at things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
It,
point.
the other point I want to make also is that the uh, the grid today
Mm,
wouldn't be able to support the electrification of everything along the lines of what we just talked about, right? It's one third the size, and that may be underestimated. It might
mm.
be 20% the size for the kind of energy demand that we are expecting now with AI and other developments and other requirements.
Pretty good. So what is next? What is next for Power Tap?
Yeah, so along the lines of what I mentioned earlier, we're starting with truck stations, and you'll see our first locations along key trucking corridors. That's kind of important. We also intend to have scaling partnerships with fleet operations, and their trucking companies, assuming that everybody wants decarbonization, and they do, they're going to be eager for a clean, affordable hydrogen, and that's what we can provide. And as we expand into Europe and Asia, global hydrogen demand is just exploding, and we're positioning ourselves to be at the forefront of that.
Pretty good. I think this is a awesome conversation. You know, for me, I mean, I feel I consider myself educated about energy technologies, but I think conversation with you destroyed some of the myths I had. It made certainly a very bold claim, a case for hydrogen, and I think your plan for PowerTap is pretty bold, pretty practical plan. I mean, it makes sense to me. So thanks a lot. I mean, this was an awesome conversation, Salim.
Thank you, Pradyum. Absolutely. It was a great discussion. I can see, you're an engineer, you kind of get it, but the solutions are out there that engineers like you will come up with.